If you've been having a hard time taking random pieces of XPS foam and breaking it down into perfect squares, then this video is for you. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Blackmagic Craft. This episode, I want to focus on something that comes up quite often, something that I get asked all the time, and that's how do you manage to make your 3x3 dungeon tile squares perfect squares that are all the same size and fit together nicely. Often people will try to make the tiles and they get pieces that are a little bit wonky, their angles start to go all over the place and they don't line up nicely, especially when you take a whole bunch and put them in a row, little errors start to multiply and grow. So how do you make perfect squares? Especially, how do you make them out of a random piece that might not have a good factory edge or a predetermined right angle? Well, that's what this video is about. You don't need to start with a factory edge. You can take a piece that's carved like crazy and break it down to perfect squares using basic carpentry principles. I'm going to show you how I do it. So you get a random piece of foam with random angles that are who knows what. Just looking at this one, I can tell that this is not a right angle, this is not a right angle. I don't know if this is even, but I want to break this down into a perfect square or into a couple perfect squares. How do I do that? The principles are the same for any type of layout work. This is basic kind of carpentry, geometry layout stuff. Doesn't matter what the material is, the principles are the same. So here, just with a knife, the first thing you want to do is get a straight line on the longer direction of your piece. I mean, these appear to be straight lines, but I can't assume that they actually are because there's a very good chance that they're not. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut a new straight line. And it doesn't matter where I hold this on it. It's just the singular line that needs to be straight, no relation to any other angles. So just a quick cut. Now I have one straight line. And it's not a bad idea to mark which one that is when you're doing something like this so you don't forget. So now, let's say that I want to make a couple 3x3 squares out of this. I want to take my straight line and draw a line parallel to it at exactly the width that I want. In this case, it's going to be 3 inches. So I'm going to take a ruler, measure out 1, 2, 3 inches, make a mark, go down, take a ruler, 1, 2, 3 inches, make a mark. So now, can connect these points, taking some effort to make sure it's sitting right on my marks nicely, and I'm gonna cut this. So now, I have a strip that is exactly 3 inches wide, parallel across the whole thing, but I have some funky angles at the end. So what I want to do is take one of these straight lines and a good quality carpenter square and cut a perfect 90-degree angle. I want to make sure that this edge is completely flush along this straight line. Take my piece, take my knife, cut. Now what I have is a perfect right angle here, and by default, a perfect right angle there. I can take this, line my square up against one of these edges, and mark out 3 inches. Take this, line it up flush to my 3-inch mark. You could, if you're not so comfortable with your layout, measure in on both the top and bottom to make sure that this stays square. But once you're comfortable, you should know that you're lined up properly. Cut across this, and I have my perfect spot. I can now make another mark. I can actually just go across and make marks every 3 inches until there's no room left to do any more. There's a piece. There's a piece. So everything's going to line up nicely. if these are tiles. You can take this on a bigger piece and scale it up, but the basic principle of one straight line, parallel straight line, 90-degree angle, and then continuous cuts after is basically how you go about getting a bunch of squares. It is still very easy when doing this by hand with a carpenter square to screw it up if you're not careful. And the even better and faster way to do it is with a hot wire table with a rip fence and a crosscut guide. And then you can machine out more and more pieces that are true more quickly. So I'm gonna pull over the hot wire table and show you how I do it with that. So here I have a piece of foam that has all sorts of wacky cuts on it. You can see this looks terrible. Nothing is really usable here. So what I want to do is set my rip fence a little bit wider than whatever the size that I want to get is. So let's say I want 3x3 pieces. I'm going to set my rip fence to like 3.5 or a little bit more, because I'm going to take the edge that is kind of straight but not really, and I'm going to run it through once and then flip it and run it through again. So this first cut will not be perfect, but it will be reasonable. It'll be just a starter cut, giving me something fairly straight to work with. So now I have this. I'm gonna flip it like this. And now that this edge is reasonably straight, but could still be wavy, if I run it through on this side, again, oversized from the 3 inches that I want, it's gonna give me a pretty good straight cut. Now, at this point, I can flip it over again. I got a relatively straight line there. And this is when I can set my rip fence to the actual size that I want my squares to be. In this case, as is almost always the case, that's gonna be 3 inches. So now I run this through at 3 inches, and this again is gonna give me the parallel 3-inch strip. Okay, so now that I have this parallel strip, I need to make some 90-degree angles here. So this is where I want to make sure that this rip fence is set to a perfect 90 degrees, and you can just use the grid on the table here as a guide. And I'm going to take one of my freshly cut straight lines, put it on the rip fence, and cross cut it like this. And now here I have what should in theory be 2 perfectly square corners, 90-degree angles. I can then take my rip fence, put it back into the rip position, either measure it at 3 inches or just use my actual piece as a guide, tighten it up, take this, the corners that you know now to be truly square, and run that along the rip fence, and this will now create a perfect 90-degree corner on this side, and you can just now make several perfect squares. This one's probably too small. Nope. So out of that random junky piece of foam, I now have 4 squares that are perfectly the same size and will fit together nicely if I lay them out on the table as tiles. That's basically it. You can take these same principles, scale them up to any size piece you have, and go from there. There you have it. I hope that you found this useful and that it improves the quality of your pieces that you are cutting. I'd like to mention that I've actually made this video once before, and that was several weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago now, when one of the members of the Blackmagic Craft Fellowship, which is the private Facebook group for my supporters on Patreon, ran into this very same problem, got a bunch of wacky squares and didn't know what the issue was, thought there was something wrong with his setup of the Proxxon. So I actually answered that question in a Facebook Live video in that group. So those folks have been privy to this information for a while. So to them, sorry, this is a bit of a repeat. But the point is, if you want to get in on some of those cool extras ahead of time and you want to reach out to me for help with whatever problems you're having, consider supporting Blackmagic Craft on Patreon and joining the fellowship. Also, if you want to pick up any of the tools or supplies that I used in this or other videos, your Olfa knife, your carpenter square, your hotwire table, whatever, head over to blackmagicraft.ca. There I have links to Amazon products that I use and recommend, and they are affiliate links, so I get a small commission, and you shopping helps fund this channel and future videos. Of course, if you like this video, hit that like button, drop me a comment below, hit subscribe if you aren't already a subscriber. And until next week, guys, cheers, have a great weekend.